Hi friends! Thank you so much for joining me for another card video. Today's card is featuring products from the Greetery, including the Harvest Home stamp set and the Crimped frame dies. So without further ado, let's get to it. To start, I'm taking some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, and I'm using the Crimped frame dies to create a wide frame border for my card front. The inside die will cut out the rectangle, while the outside die will leave a pretty detailed border around the outside of the frame. I use these dies, especially the larger one, on almost all of my cards because it's such an easy way to add some pretty detailing. Now I'm taking the same cardstock in the 110-pound version, and this piece is cut to 5.5 by 8.5, and I'm scoring it at 4.25. This will be my card base. So I'll just enforce that fold, and then we can get to adding the card front. Before I do any stamping, I'm going to take my frame to my card base, and I'm going to trace that inner rectangle. This will give me an idea of where I will be aligning the frame each time I bring it back to my card, as well as where to do stamping and ink blending later on. Now I'm going to the stamp set, and I'm taking the top leaf stamp. I'm going to trace this because I don't want to stamp it out. I am using the top leaf as my hillside, and I want it to be kind of a snowy hillside, so it's going to be white with some gray detailing on it. So I'm tracing it so I know where to line up those stripes. Now to stamp out the stripes, I'm using Fog ink from Simon's Stamp. This is a nice light gray ink, and it will be perfect for a snowy hillside without looking like a gray, sad hillside. So now that I have that stamped out, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out as well. I'm following the lines for the top, but for the bottom of the shape, it really doesn't matter because it will be hidden behind the frame. My next step is to stamp out the little barn. What I love about the Greetery stamps is that they're often layering stamp sets. So there's 3 layers to this little barn. The first layer I'm stamping in cherry red ink from the Stamp Market. This is a nice bright red ink, and I did stamp it twice. Now I'm taking the second layer, which is easy to line up, and I'm using lipstick red ink to stamp that down, also from the Stamp Market. I didn't press very hard at all because I didn't want the ink to kind of spread out and fill in lines where I didn't want it. And now I'm doing the roof, which I will be stamping in Gina K Warm Cocoa ink. The Greetery stamp sets come with a stamping guide, so you know exactly how to line up each layer, which I find really helpful. And now I'll go ahead and fussy cut out the barn. I take my own sweet time when I'm fussy cutting. This is actually sped up, but I really don't mind the fussy cutting process, especially with the images in this stamp set. They're really super easy to cut out. So now I'll start arranging my scene. First, I'm going to use some Tombow Permanent Adhesive to adhere my snowy hillside to the back of my frame. That's super easy, and then I'll figure out where I want the barn. I was going back and forth between putting it behind the hillside or in front, and I do decide on putting it in front. Once I have it arranged exactly where I want it, I will go ahead and trace the side of the barn as well as the top of the hill, because I will be doing some stamping on the card base, and I want to know where my images are going to be when I'm finished. So I take the little fence stamp from the stamp set, and I line that up with the hill pencil line that I made on the card base. I stamp that using the Warm Cocoa ink from Gina K Designs so it matches my barn a little bit, and then I'll do the same on the other side. I go ahead and erase the pencil lines because I won't be needing them anymore, and I line up my frame just to make sure that it's all lined up perfectly and I like how it looks. Now I'll begin ink blending. For this, I'm using chipped Sapphire Distress Oxide ink and black Soot Distress Oxide ink. I like using Distress Oxides because they tend to blend out more evenly for me, especially when I have a lighter hand. For this, I'm using Simon's Stamp blending brushes. As you can see, I did start blending, and then I decided I better mask off the outer border so I don't get ink where I don't want it to be. I'm also using just a piece of scrap cardstock over the side to dab off the brush so I don't put too much ink on at one time. I'm being very light-handed, and I'm taking my time to spread the ink across the rectangle that I left on my card base and down towards where the barn will be. Every now and again, I'll bring in my frame to see if I'm liking how the color is dispersed. Now I'm coming in with the black Soot Distress Oxide ink, and this was very intimidating to me. I haven't used this dark of a distress ink before, but I see Christina Werner do it all the time, darkening up her ink blending with a little bit of black at the top, and I thought I might as well give it a try. So here I'm testing it out on some cardstock just to see how it spreads and how much will be on the card when I first apply it. And when I first start, I'm really worried that I just ruined my card. I wasn't really liking it. But then when I bring in my frame with my little barn, it kind of puts it into perspective and I realize that it doesn't look bad at all. And so I keep going. I add a little bit more black soot and then I'll come back in with the chipped sapphire and really blend that out and blend it up into the black, as well as down a little bit more. So I have a lot more color on my background. Now that I'm satisfied with my ink blending, I have to pick out a sentiment. I'm pretty sure I went through my whole collection of Christmas stamp sets to figure out what I would be stamping as my sentiment, and while I was doing that, the song It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas came on my music twice, so that's what I'm going with. I prepped the area with my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going in with some Versamark ink because I will be heat embossing this. I go ahead and stamp that down, not pressing too hard because I don't want the letters to become misshapen. I'm using white embossing powder from Ranger. I'll top off the excess, and then there were some smaller areas that had powder where I didn't want it, so I just use a dry paintbrush to kind of move that around. I heat up my heat gun before bringing it to my card, and then I keep it moving while I'm heating the area. This is the card base, so I would like to have minimal warping. Now I prep the area again with my anti-static powder tool, and I'm coming in with the little stars stamp from the stamp set. And I just put that on an acrylic block so that I can maneuver it around my sentiment. I sped this up so it wouldn't take forever, but I took my time to make sure I had the stars where I wanted them. Again, I'm using some white embossing powder. This would be really pretty if you want to do it in silver or gold for a metallic finish, but I wanted to stick with the classic clean white look. So I'll tap off the excess and again bring my heat gun over to it. I'll heat both sides of the card, and honestly at this point there's a lot of warping. It was kind of inevitable, but I will deal with that a little bit later. For now, when I brought my frame over to the card base, I realized there was an area that I wanted more stars. And it was a little tricky because I didn't want to stamp over what I had already put down. So I brought over a post-it note and just covered up the previous stamping, stamped where I wanted, and then did the whole embossing process again. So now I'll check that I like how everything is arranged, and then I will go ahead and adhere my barn. Before now it was just kind of temporarily adhered. Now I'm using some Gina Connect glue, just putting a thin line of that at the bottom of the barn and adhering it to the front of the hillside. As I mentioned before, there is a lot of warping on that card base, so my solution is to put it under my MISTI with a bucket of inks and weigh it down for a little bit. After maybe an hour passed, I came back to it and it was perfectly flat. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere my frame to the front of the card. To do this, I'm using some craft foam. This will pop it up and add a lot of fun dimension and make it look like a real pretty Christmas scene. I'm not shy with the foam tape. I don't want anything to happen to this card in the mail, so I'm very generous with it. I'll go ahead and remove the release paper and line that up on my card. I don't know about you, but it takes me forever to line things up. I'm not sure if it's because I'm a perfectionist or if I don't have steady hands, but if anyone has any tips on how to line up perfectly, let me know. I thought I was done with the card, but I felt like something was missing, and I went back to the stamp set and found this little crescent moon stamp. So I decided I wanted to heat emboss that on my card as well. Honestly, bad timing because I already put that frame on, but I was going to give it a go. So I put the embossing powder just over where I stamped the image, kind of shake it around, hoping to adhere more powder to it, and then I just flip it over as aggressively and quickly as possible, hoping that the powder would just fly right off the front. And honestly, it looks like I did a pretty good job, so I was like, that was easy. Let me do it again, just so that I have a really great embossed image. This time I got powder a little bit further over, and I go and I blow on it, and I realize that I had powder all up in the frame. So I had to shake that out, and then I took a dry paintbrush to it to get the excess out. But this is my card, and I really love how it turned out. I think it's such a clean, classic Christmas look. Thank you so much for joining me for this card video today. I hope you liked it, and if you do, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more crafty content from me, go ahead and subscribe. I hope to see you real soon. Thanks, bye.